Welcome to Hammond, Wisconsin and Lock Miter Thursday. I'm excited to do this Lock Miter presentation today. And it's interesting doing this live because of course, if there's any opportunity to mess up, you don't get to hide it when you're doing this stuff live. So I'm very excited to show you MicroJig's bit and their setup, which has a lot of shortcuts to getting a well-fitted lock miter joint. Couple things to start out with. One, happy spring. Lovely day in May here in Wisconsin. Max and I were just talking. The sun is finally out. We've had a lot of rain the last couple of days. Two, it's a lovely day. You should be thinking about sitting outside, which might mean you want to build an Adirondack chair. The Adirondack chair plan is one, honestly, I did that video a long time ago, but it's just summer after summer after summer, people are grabbing that plan and building Adirondack chairs because it's a very cool project. What I really like about this particular design is the seat has a curve in it that your butt goes into. The back has a curve in it that your back goes into, and there's a little bit of an angle on the back. When you look at a lot of other plans, the seat is angled, but it's straight. The back is angled, but it's straight. So when you sit in them, you're not really nested into the chair. With this design, your butt and your back nest into the chair, which makes it really, really comfortable. So check out that download. I know Max is putting up the QR code. You can also just scroll down to the link where you can grab that. But you really want to get started on that now so that you have the chairs for summer. And I've said this about other projects. If you're going to build 2 or 4 for yourself, you might as well tool up and build 6 more for your friends because they're going to ask for them. I'm going to jump in right from the jump with a couple of questions that were already posted. Kent asked a little bit ago, I'm looking for a 3+ horsepower router motor to mount in my router table for making raised panels and running other large bits. What router motor do you have in your router table? Are you happy with it? I can't seem to find consistently good ratings on any of the router motors. Historically, the Porter Cable 7518, 3-horse router, 15 amp router, has been the router of choice for router tables literally for decades. That's the good news. The bad news is Porter Cable is no longer making that router. One approach to that would be if you look on Facebook Marketplace, Craigslist, maybe you can find one used. That's what I had in my router table literally for 30 years. So recently the speed control went on it. The cost of repairing the speed control on it was more than the cost of a new router, so I didn't have it fixed. What I have hanging in here right now is the Milwaukee 3-horse router, still 15 amp, so 3-horse, variable speed. I've used the Milwaukee 3-horse router for years and years and years. I've been very happy with it. Just to talk about motors and router tables for a second, as a general rule, you want a fixed base router in a router table, and that makes it easiest to adjust the height of the bit. Certainly, if you're doing what I'm doing, which is I've got a router lift in this table, then you need a fixed base router motor that's going to go in that lift. Kind of the exception to that rule is with Triton's products. They've made their plunge routers very router table friendly. So as far as adjusting the height of the cutter, although that's a plunge router, they've made it easy to do with their plunge base hanging upside down in a router table. So Milwaukee 3-horse has served me very well. And as a general rule, you're looking for fixed base style routers. Another question, what size or horsepower router do you recommend for the router table for this cutter? You could do this with a 12 amp motor. So again, I'm running a 15 amp. So when we subdivide router motors, usually 10 amp, 12 amp, 15 amp. 12 amp would be about a 2¼ horsepower. That would do what we're about to do here. Okay, let's talk about lock miters. So that's a Devo song, right? Is that Devo? Never mind. I'm dating myself. A lock miter is a crazy cool joint. Let me get you in where you can see more better what I'm talking about. What's neat about a lock miter is that we increase the surface area between the two components. This is the joint we're about to create. When it's done, unlike a drawer lock joint, which has a similar mechanical configuration, when we're done, it's a miter, so we can't see the joint on the outside. We just see this corner. We see a miter. So we've got a lot of mechanical strength here. We've got a lot of glue surface here. That's all the good news. The bad news is, historically, these are really, really fussy to set up. Lock miter joints, lock miter router bits are very fussy to set up. The joint is predicated on, it's set up based on the center of the cutter. So the challenge in getting this in the router table right is knowing where the center is, and then from that, how does that relate to my workpiece? How do I get this set up so that the center of the bit corresponds to the workpiece? This is where I'm very product specific here. This is MicroJig's, that's the company, lock miter bit, and I'm also going to be using their FitFinder. So let's talk about this thing first. Outside of lock miters, the FitFinder is a generally useful tool to have, because what it does is, when I've got this loose and I rest this side on a something, I'm grabbing a board. When I rest that side on that board, like that, that finger is automatically at the center point of said board. This can be really useful if you're trying to find the center of round stock. So again, I can capture the round stock under here. That side is going to automatically point to center. We're going to use it here with the lock miter in order to get that bit centered on this material. Here's how this would work. You start out the same as what I've already done. We let this rest on our work. And what I'm doing on the back here is I'm tightening lock nuts. So all of that is held in place. Now, what makes the MicroJig bit, router bit, specific to what we're about to do is when you look right there, and of course, router's unplugged. When you look right there, that ledge that's been machined into the bit is the perfect geometric center of that profile. That's where we correlate this to this by doing this. I'm going to lower the cutter. And you don't have to have a router lift for this. It does make it much easier to do. I love when I'm setting up fussy cutters, I love the convenience of doing it with a router lift instead of adjusting a fixed base router, but you could do this with a fixed base router. So what I want you to watch here is the shoulder that I just pointed out to you. I'm going to raise that cutter until the shoulder is kissing the bottom of that finger. And again, that finger is calling out, is indicating the center of the material that I just had on my table. So let me get down here where I can look and see what I'm doing. That should be that. I'm going to lock that in place. Then with every lock miter bit, whether it's MicroJig's or anybody else's, the other relationship we have to be aware of is we've got three planes now that we're concerned about. One is the top of the material. One is the face of the fence. And the third is the carbide on the cutter itself. For this, I'm going to zoom you in a little bit. The way this next step works is we bring the fence forward, and it will come forward until we get to a very specific junction, which is with the board against the fence and a straight edge on top of the board and against the fence. We want to bring that straight edge out. And I'm looking for the point where the edge of that ruler kisses that carbide. So right now, I'm way too far forward. I'm too far this way. So I'm going to scoot back a little bit. And what I like to feel for with this ruler and the carbide is when I can feel that drag just a little bit. So I'm still out too far. Still out too far. Right there, when I do this, I can feel that that edge is dragging a little bit. So you can't see it, but I'm reaching to tighten the fence down. And I'm going to check that again now that I think I'm in place. Yeah, it might have shifted just a tiny bit. There. So let me see if I get my microphone close. Just listen. There's just a little bit of a drag sound as that ruler goes across the carbide. That's where we're going to start. Going to come out again and do this. And then I'm going to look for questions before I make a cut. And I'll talk about a couple other things. I've got a pretty good pile of wood here. What's important is that when you're going to make test cuts, your test cut material has to be exactly the same thickness as your project material. The setup that we're doing, obviously you saw when I used the FitFinder to find the center of the board, when we set the height of that cutter, it's now thickness specific to this piece. So one thing people will say is like, well, can't you just make a setup gauge? You could, if project after project after project, everything you're doing is going to be exactly the same thickness. And exactly the same meaning, if you change by a few thousandths of an inch, it's going to change this. So of this pile, a couple of these are going to turn into test pieces in order to see if this is right or not. And then the rest will be project pieces. When you're doing your test cuts, it's much easier to cut long grain than cross grain. So I always do my test cuts parallel to the grain just because it's easier to machine, even if the box I'm about to do later requires an end grain cut. I'll do all the test cuts long grain. All right, let me look for questions quick, and then we'll do a test cut. Think we're set. So Jeff says, I'm smack dab in the middle of doing my first miter lock jointed project. I'm set up for 7/8 stack, but struggling to get the vertical face stabilized, hoping to see your solutions. Someone else says, on routers, on large horsepower routers, Bora, Woodpecker, and Jessam all manufacture routers for use in a router table. Yep. Jack asked, can you join two different thicknesses in a right angle? No, you would. Both of these pieces, the vertical, you'll see we're about to make a vertical and a horizontal pass. Both pieces have to be the same. Lawrence says, is the blade exposure you have now what you will cut with? So yes, we're trying to we're going in a direction where once this is correctly set, it's correctly set. So we wouldn't mess with that again. Here's my recommendation. when you think you have it correctly set, start by doing a test cut, which is the part of the problem people have with lock miters is that we're working in a bunch of different planes here. When we do the cut that we really want for the joint, one piece gets fed face against the fence like this. The adjacent piece gets fed face down on the router table. Start by doing face down, and I'll show you what we get from that. It's much easier to diagnose if we have this right or not by doing that as a starting point. So I'm there. I think I'm ready to go. Fence is locked. Dust collection is on. And the test to see if the height of that bit is correct or not is to take these two test pieces and do, where am I? And do this. If these are even across the face, you're done. One of three things is going to happen at this point. They're going to be even, like they are right now, or I'm going to show you other examples, or there's going to be a step between the two faces, and that could be two different steps. So it's one of three things. They're even, they're stepped one below the other, or they're stepped one above the other. So let me show you what I'm talking about. We've got even. If they are wrong, one version of wrong could be this. When you look at this, see how this, the face of this piece is below the face of this piece. In this scenario, the router bit is too high in the table. If we look at this one, it's kind of the yin of the yang. The face of this piece is way above this one. This tells you the bit is too low in the table. Now, when you look at this offset, if that's 1/8 of an inch, you make a 1/16 of an inch adjustment on your cutter because we're affecting both parts. The other thing that you want to look for, now that we've done this, is did you get a perfect knife edge on the piece? And if you did, then you're done. If not, that would be the fence that needs adjustment. So let me talk about this. So what we're looking for is this. We're looking for that perfect knife edge on that piece. If when you're done, instead of a knife edge, it's flat across there, the fence is too far forward. You're not taking enough material off. Now, this is different than the height of the bit I just got done talking about. Once we know the height is correct, so the two boards meet flush, now we have to examine, is the fence in the right spot? So if you make a cut and this has a flat on it, the fence is too close to you, we're not taking enough material off. If as you cut, you can see it removing material here on that edge, or it snipes at the very end, the fence is too far back and you've got to move it forward just a little bit. So this is why when I said when I started out by doing this test cut, and I said the easiest way to start is machining 2 parts on the flat. That's going to tell us all of that stuff. It's going to tell us if the height is correct and if the fence is correct. When you machine 1 piece on the flat and 1 piece against the fence, the way you're going to normally make a joint, then, and you look at it and it's not right, the question is, okay, what's wrong with this picture? Is it the fence position or the router bit height or both, maybe? So that's the beauty of doing those 2 flats first. Checking for questions again. What I'm trying to do with this method for you is eliminate variables. So one elimination is buy the MicroJig bit and the FitFinder. It comes as a kit. And that is a big shortcut to getting the height of the bit correct. The next shortcut is when you start, machine those 2 pieces on the flat to double check the height of the cutter. Richard says, you took the whole cut in 1 pass. Is that normal with this bit? Maybe, maybe not. It depends. This is poplar and walnut, 5/8 inch thick, cutting long grain. This bit will easily handle that in a single pass. If you want to, if you're not comfortable doing that in a single pass, you can cut a chamfer on the piece. You can't mess with the height of the cutter because once that's set, it's set. Messing with the position of the fence is also touchy. My recommendation would be you chamfer a corner off the piece. So we would just take with a router bit or on the table saw, we would bevel the corner. That does some stock removal for you before you make this cut, if you want to do that. Looks like the same question out of Aaron. Is it advised to route little by little? If the wood's exceptionally hard or you're going to, how do you manage this? So yeah, same. If I was doing this in hard maple, 3/4 inch thick, which this bit would handle, this bit will manage from 1/2 inch material to 3/4 inch material. If I was doing 3/4 stock hard maple, I would start with a chamfer. Can you use this jig with bits other than MicroJig's? No, because what makes the FitFinder work with this is that MicroJig is machined in that shoulder that shows you exactly where the center is. Mark says, would there be a benefit in using 0 clearance on the fence? So maybe. What I'm going to do today, I'm ready to do a cut, I'm ready to do a joint. So long grain, I'm going to machine a piece this way, and then I'm going to grab a mating piece and machine it against the fence. Also long grain. If you were doing a box that's going to get joined like this, so then we're going this way and this way, then 0 clearancing, is that a verb? 0 clearancing your fence might be a benefit if you're getting a lot of chipping. And again, that's going to depend on if you're cutting poplar, it would probably machine cross grain just fine. If you're cutting birch, bird's eye maple, then you might have to 0 clearance the fence to make sure that you don't chip the heck out of this face. For what we're doing today, it's not going to be necessary. Again, both cuts are long grain cuts. So Jack says, can you mention a source? So yeah, the name of the cutter, if you look at the description, George will be using the MicroJig lock miter bit and FitFinder. And then if you just Google that, you'll find a bunch of places that sell them. And then another question. Can you use 1/2 inch stock? So yeah, it's 1/2 to 3/4 is the capacity of this. So now we're ready to go. We're done with test pieces. So you grab your project material which oddly enough looks exactly like my test pieces. And remember that when we're doing the real deal, one piece gets fed face down on the table, one piece gets fed with its face against the fence. When you do this, easy mental error to make would be to switch passes. In other words, do it like this and then like this. You don't want to do that. So if I were making a real project here, I would machine this edge, rotate it, machine this edge. Same thing to this one. I'm going to go ahead and cut this. Then we're going to make a small change before I do that vertical. I think I will. I'll zoom you in again for this pass. So the thing we want to do differently now, we're going to machine that walnut like this. I want to have a feather board present that's helping to hold that material tight against the fence. So that's the only change between the vertical and the horizontal, is making sure I have this so that that can't walk away from the fence as I'm cutting it. Then we have that. Wait for that to stop so I can move that. And we have that. How's that for cool? It's one of the things I really like about a lock miter is using contrasting materials, walnut and maple. In this case, it's walnut and poplar, because the joint looks so neat that I want people to know that I worked very hard to make a lock miter, and they should appreciate that. So having contrasting materials highlights that, and it really lets the lock miter show. Bob says, my fence locks on the ends. I set up the bit and set a stop on one end, pivot one end of the fence forward, do 1/2 or 1/3 of the cut, then pivot back for a full cut. So yeah, that's back to doing this, and the idea of doing this in multiple steps, multiple passes, rather than doing it all in one stroke. So you can do that by bringing the fence, get everything set so you know it's right. Then bring the fence forward. Don't change the height of the bit. Bring the fence forward to reduce how much material you're taking off, and then incrementally move it back until you're where you need to be for full pass. And somebody on YouTube says the 1617 EVS is a great router for a router table. Okay. So, a few things. Don't, I always say this with woodworking stuff, don't do this for the very first time when you're trying to make the gift you need on Christmas Eve and it's December 22nd. You need to go in the shop. You need to practice this. what I did like forever ago, these pieces that I showed you with this tells me the bid is too high or too low. I I have probably owned these pieces for 25 years. And I keep them in a little bin, and then I can look at them and say, okay, when it looks like that, it's written right on here, written right on there. That tells me the bit's too low. The other one tells me the bit's too high. So keep some of your test pieces so you know where this went wrong when you did it the very first time. That's going to give you shortcuts to success. And again, I've used a lot of lock miter bits, and the challenge is always aligning the center of the cutter with the center of your stock. That's always the starting point. And in the absence of and I'm not a salesperson for MicroJig. I just think this is a great problem solver you should know about if you want to make lock miters. So what they've done here by really defining where is the center point of that profile, where's the center of that geometry, that coupled with this, the FitFinder gizmo, is a great way to make this easier to do. Then two, this isn't, as I said when I started, this isn't just a lock miter thing. If you want to make half lap joints, you're taking away half the thickness of each piece. You could use this to set a dado head or a router bit to half the thickness so that you know where to start. So in general, this is a cool tool that, coupled with the lock miter bit that they've got that shoulder on, it just makes this so much easier to do. Don't forget, with summer coming, you need Adirondack chairs to sit in. You can grab that plan. This is one of the things that I love about the way we did that, the way we put that together. The plan has full-size templates. So when you get the PDF, when you download the PDF, you're going to take that to Kinko's or someplace where they have large format printers. And you know all the curvy parts that Adirondack chairs have? You're going to print all those patterns out full size. So you're not taking a grid that's this big and expanding it to a thing that's this big by freehand drawing a bunch of lines. You just print it, and it'll give you full-scale templates that you can use for the chair. If you are WWGOA Gold, I will see you in an hour and a half. We're doing some work with epoxy for that group at 1 o'clock today. All right, couple questions. I see it leaves a glue well at the bottom. Does that concern you as showing? No, because once these parts are sitting here with no clamp pressure on them. So once we glue them, we clamp them, we close that, it's all fine. Can you explain how to make the vertical cut across end grain and walnut? Yep, so it'd be the same thing, which would be, we're going to take this piece and we're going to make this pass. A couple things that might change. If you're making a relatively narrow box, I would leave these parts overly wide. So let's say I wanted to make a box that was 4 inches deep when it's done. I would be doing this with an 8.5 inch wide piece. Then after the lock miter is cut, I would rip those into narrow parts. The reason being, it's easier to feed this when there's a lot of contact with the router table. If the part is narrow, it might have a tendency to walk. So just in general, drawer lock bits, lock rabbets, which I've taught many, 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 many times, lock miters. You don't want to do narrow parts horizontally or vertically because they can walk away from the table or walk away from the fence. So start with a wider piece. That's going to make it easier. You can also just create a jig that gives you a support here, and kind of like a tenoning jig on a table saw that's going to help you make that easier to feed. Sommerfeld Tools makes a bit similar to this. Have you used it? Nope. I have I know Mark Sommerfeld, or I knew Mark Sommerfeld very well. I haven't seen anything from them that includes a centering setup like this, but maybe I've missed it. Can you review too high, too low? Yep. Let me get back to the other camera. So we have got 3 scenarios. You do your test cut, and if life is great, the 2 parts end up even. That's what we want. Or you do your test cut, and this face is way above this face. The knife edge is above the face of the adjacent piece. If you're looking at this, the bit is too low. Or you do the test cut, and the knife edge, open that up so it's easier to see. The knife edge is below the face of this piece. In that case, the cutter is too high. Whatever the offset is, change the bit by half that amount. Does this work with plywood? I don't know. I have never tried that. You'd want to use a good grade of plywood so that you don't get the core chipping out a lot. That's a lot of cutter. And I would be concerned about the inner laminations blowing out if it's marginal plywood. But I would think on a Baltic birch, a multiply, it would probably work, but I've never tried it. You'd have to experiment. What is zero clearance? So zero clearance is when you close the fence on the infeed side right up against the spinning cutter so that you, as the bit exits, it's supported by the fence. If on www.goa.com, where you are right now, you go to the search window in the top and you look for zero clearance, there's a whole video about doing that, about making your router table fence zero clearance. Is there a horsepower minimum for making this in one pass? I would want to do this with a 12 amp motor or bigger. And then again, if it sounds like the router's working hard or if it's making you heebie-jeebie, then start with a chamfer cut to remove some of the waste before you do this, or move the fence forward and do it on multiple passes. Have you considered using your CNC to make hardboard templates for the Adirondack chair? Yep, I have cut all the Adirondack chair parts on a CNC. Especially when cutting end grain, you need a support block. Yep. Woodcraft sells the MicroJig products. So there's one source for you there. Woodcraft, I think Rockler, I know Amazon has them. When you added the featherboard, it looked to be centered on the bit. I was thinking featherboards always need to be ahead of the bit or saw blade. What's correct and why? On a table saw, you never want to have the featherboard pressing against the blade because we're doing a through cut. So then what you're doing is you're pressing the waste side of the cut against the saw blade. That's not this scenario. We don't have that happening here. Is there a preferred orientation for front versus side pieces that gives better strength? I don't think so. So either way, we're making a mitered tongue and groove is what we're doing. And whether the tongue component is in the side or the front of a something, and I guess the exception would be if you're using this, it's my other part. If you're using this to make I got so much stuff laying here. If you're using this to make a drawer, then the same thing would apply that applies to a dovetail, which would be the joint. In this case, we could say the tongue is in the walnut. So that's going to get inserted into the groove in the poplar. If I pull this way, they still come apart. If I put them together and I pull this way, they won't come apart. So if you're doing a drawer box, you would want this component. It's hard to see, the lights flashing and blowing it out. We'd want this component to be the drawer front for the same reason as a lock rabbit or a dovetail, that they hang together this way. They don't hang together that way. How's that for a graphic demonstration? How's that for lock miter live? Like, what a touchy joint to do live, and it went okay. When you flip either of the two low, two high pieces, the result's the same. So it's not. If when the knife edge is below the face, whether I'm looking at it this way or this way, knife edge is below the face, knife edge is below the face. And in that case, I got to read it, the bit is too high. Knife edge above the face, knife edge above the face, bit is too low. Don't tease Texans with your wonderful weather. Yeah, I talked to my kid today. She's in Austin. I think it's really, really hot there, right? It's like 100 degrees there. What angle and depth would you cut the chamfer? A 45-degree chamfer, and you got to experiment with the depth so you don't take away too much wood that costs you your lock miter. So you got to do some test cuts of both. You got to test cut the chamfer, basically trying to eliminate as much waste as you can. But if you take too much off, then you won't have enough left to produce that ton. So you got to experiment with it based on the thickness of your stock. But a 45-degree chamfer would be perfect because it matches the 45 of the lock miter. This was good. A lot of questions. Thanks for asking a lot of questions. So that tells us there's a lot of interest in lock miter stuff. Thanks for watching. If you are, again, if you're WWGOA Gold, I will see you at 1 o'clock for some epoxy work and a carved river table. It's a very cool project. We'll talk a lot about epoxy there. And then other than that, where are we at? It's May something, May 22nd. So I think the next time I'll see you will be in June for that live stream, right? Looks like Max, I'm gonna double check for questions one more time. All right, I think we're set. So big thank you to Max behind the scenes, making all the technology side of this work. Grab that Adirondack chair download, and I will see you the next time we do a live stream.